Photography had always been more than just a career for James, it was his life's purpose. Through his lens, he saw the world in a way most couldn't, raw, unfiltered, and brimming with stories waiting to be told. He had spent years documenting forgotten corners of the earth, capturing moments that few dared to witness. So, when the Times offered him the opportunity to cover the conflict in Syria, he didn't hesitate. This was history in the making, a chance to immortalize stories of survival and resilience. It was dangerous, yes, but James had never been one to shy away from risk. To him, every shot was worth it. Arriving in Aleppo was like stepping into another world. The once thriving city was now a haunting landscape of destruction. Towering buildings, once symbols of prosperity, stood in skeletal ruin. Streets were blanketed with debris, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of smoke and something metallic, a smell that clung to James's clothes and refused to fade. The city was eerily quiet. Even in the heart of a war zone, James expected some semblance of normalcy, a child playing, a vendor stubbornly selling wares amidst the chaos. But Aleppo had none of that. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the distant rumble of explosions and the occasional drone of a helicopter overhead. James and his small team, Ben, a writer, and Omar, their local guide and translator, settled into a modest safe house provided by a rebel group they were assigned to document. The rebels were wary at first, their trust not easily earned. But over the next few days, James's camera became a bridge between them. His lens captured their exhaustion, their determination, and their fleeting moments of humanity in the face of overwhelming adversity. Evenings were spent sharing stories over weak tea and stale bread. The rebels spoke of their families, their dreams, and their hopes for a future free of conflict. James listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of their words. Through his camera, he felt connected to them, their struggles becoming his own. But amidst the camaraderie, there was an undercurrent of unease. Omar, usually composed, seemed more on edge as the days went by. He would glance nervously at his phone, muttering under his breath in Arabic. James chalked it up to the stress of their surroundings, until the day everything changed. The mission was straightforward: document the conditions of a nearby refugee camp. The journey would take them through a series of checkpoints, but Omar assured them it was safe. As they loaded into the beat-up van, James felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The camp was rumored to be overcrowded, its residents living in unimaginable conditions. It was exactly the kind of story James wanted to tell. The roads were treacherous, riddled with potholes and bomb craters. Omar navigated with precision, his hands steady on the wheel despite the tension in his jaw. But as they approached a fork in the road, the GPS faltered. The screen blinked, the map freezing, before disappearing altogether. "What now?" Ben asked, his voice laced with irritation. Omar frowned, studying the printed map in his lap. "Left," he said finally, his tone uncertain. James glanced out the window as they turned. The landscape grew more desolate, the buildings more decrepit. It felt wrong, but no one spoke. The van bumped along the uneven road, the silence inside mirroring the emptiness outside. And then they saw them. Men with rifles emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by scarves. The van skidded to a halt as Omar cursed under his breath. The men surrounded them, their weapons raised, barking orders in rapid Arabic. "Out of the van," Omar translated, his voice trembling. James's heart pounded as he stepped out, his camera clutched tightly to his chest. The men's eyes were cold, their movements efficient. They searched the van, confiscating their equipment before herding them into an abandoned building nearby. The air inside was damp and suffocating, the faint smell of mold mingling with the metallic tang of fear. They were shoved into a dimly lit room, the flickering bulb overhead casting ominous shadows on the cracked walls. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and terror. Their captors were a faction James hadn't heard of, their motives unclear. They spoke little, their actions calculated and deliberate. The team's possessions were stripped away, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Abu, the apparent leader, was a man of contradictions. He exuded an aura of authority, yet there was a strange gentleness in his gaze at times. Through Omar, Abu asked endless questions about their lives in the West. His fascination with London was particularly striking. "What is it like?" he asked one night, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Do people walk the streets without fear?" James hesitated. "Most of the time," he replied. Abu nodded, his expression unreadable. "And football? Do you watch?" The question caught James off guard. In the midst of their ordeal, the mention of something as mundane as football felt surreal. Yet it was these moments of connection that kept James grounded. But the fragile thread of humanity between them wasn't enough to ensure their safety. One night, Abu delivered a chilling warning. A rival group was coming, one known for their brutality. Their time was running out. Desperation fueled their courage. James and Ben pleaded with Abu, appealing to whatever shred of empathy he had left. To their surprise, he agreed to help. The escape was a harrowing journey through the city's ruins, every step fraught with danger. When they finally reached the border, the weight of their ordeal hit them. They were free, but the scars of that wrong turn would remain forever. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Tony and I had been looking forward to this night for weeks. A mutual friend's birthday party in Baton Rouge promised laughter, good music, and a break from the monotony of our workdays. The directions seemed straightforward, and the address was saved on both our phones. What could possibly go wrong? We left early, hoping to avoid the late-night rush. The drive through the outskirts of Baton Rouge was calm, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the quiet roads. We chatted about the people we'd see, joked about who would embarrass themselves first, and argued over the playlist as I drove. The anticipation of a carefree night filled the car, making it easy to ignore the growing unease that would soon creep in. As we entered a residential area, the streets became darker. The street names, Manshack Drive, Manshack Trace, Manshack Court, all looked similar, and it wasn't long before we realized we were lost. The GPS kept rerouting, offering no clarity, and the printed directions in Tony's lap seemed outdated. "I swear we've passed this street before," I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "It's fine," Tony replied, his tone dismissive. "We'll figure it out. Just take the next left." I complied, turning down a narrow street that seemed quieter than the others. The houses here were spaced far apart, their darkened windows and empty driveways creating an unsettling atmosphere. "This doesn't feel right," I muttered. "It's fine," Tony insisted, pointing ahead. "Look, there's a driveway with cars. That has to be it." Relieved, I pulled into the long gravel driveway. A modest house sat at the end, its porch light flickering faintly. Several cars were parked along the side, though no music or laughter spilled from the windows. "This can't be the place," I said, my voice tinged with doubt. "Let's just check," Tony replied, already unbuckling his seatbelt. As we stepped out of the car, the cool night air wrapped around us, carrying with it an eerie stillness. Tony knocked on the door while I hung back, scanning the quiet surroundings. Something about the house felt wrong. Before Tony could knock again, a shadow moved behind the curtains. My stomach tightened as I grabbed his arm. "Maybe we should just leave," I whispered. Before he could respond, the night exploded into chaos. A loud crack shattered the silence, and the windshield of my car burst into shards of glass. The sound of gunfire followed, sharp and deafening. "Get down!" I screamed, pulling Tony to the ground. My heart pounded in my chest as more shots rang out, each one sending jolts of adrenaline through my body. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure in the upstairs window, the barrel of a rifle glinting in the dim porch light. They weren't shooting to scare, they were aiming to kill. "We have to get out of here," Tony gasped, his face pale. "The car," I replied, my voice trembling. We crawled back to the vehicle, glass crunching under our hands and knees. My fingers fumbled with the door handle as another bullet shattered the rear window. Tony scrambled into the passenger seat, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his shirt, the dark stain spreading quickly. "I've been hit," he said weakly. Panic threatened to consume me, but I forced myself to stay focused. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse. The tires screeched against the gravel as we sped backward down the driveway. The gunfire continued, bullets thudding against the car's metal frame. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white as I navigated the narrow road. "Stay with me," I begged Tony, glancing at him briefly. His breaths were shallow, his face growing paler by the second. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Every second was a battle against the fear that Tony wouldn't make it. His blood soaked the seat, and his weak attempts to reassure me only made it harder to stay calm. When the bright lights of Baton Rouge General came into view, a wave of relief washed over me. I pulled up to the emergency entrance, screaming for help. Paramedics rushed to the car, their movements swift and efficient as they worked to stabilize Tony. I followed them into the hospital, my clothes stained with his blood. The waiting room was a blur of fluorescent lights and muted voices. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, every minute filled with dread and guilt. Hours later, a doctor emerged. "He's stable," she said, offering a small smile. "The bullet missed his vital organs. He's lucky." Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what had happened. The police arrived shortly after, taking my statement and piecing together the events of the night. The man who shot at us had mistaken us for intruders, his paranoia fueled by a series of recent break-ins in the neighborhood. He was arrested but later released on a reduced sentence. The damage, however, was done. Tony recovered physically, but the emotional scars lingered for both of us. The sound of gunfire haunted my dreams, and every dark street felt like a trap waiting to spring. We never made it to the party, and we never drove through that neighborhood again. A simple wrong turn had changed our lives forever. Would you have reacted the same way? Let us know in the comments and share your thoughts on this harrowing tale. Rob and I had been planning this weekend for months. Our second anniversary deserved something special, and Rob, ever the outdoorsy type, had suggested a cabin getaway in the Appalachian Hills. He painted it as the perfect mix of nature and luxury, hiking trails by day, cozy evenings by the fireplace, and a hot tub overlooking the stars. It was exactly what we needed, a break from the city, from the noise, from everything. The drive started beautifully. The hills were lush and green, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the winding roads. Rob drove, humming to the playlist he'd made just for the trip, while I snapped pictures of the scenery from the passenger seat. It felt perfect, like a movie scene come to life. But as we left the main highway and ventured deeper into the hills, things began to change. The paved roads turned to gravel, and the GPS became unreliable, constantly rerouting or losing signal entirely. We relied on the printed directions Rob had brought, but even those seemed vague. Every turn looked the same, dense trees on either side, no landmarks to guide us. "We should have just come earlier," I muttered, staring out the window at the growing shadows. The sun was setting faster than I expected, and with it came a creeping sense of unease. "We'll find it," Rob said confidently, though his hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. After another 20 minutes of driving in circles, we came to a crossroads. Rob hesitated, glancing at the directions, then at the GPS, which was frozen on a blank screen. "Left or right?" he asked. I sighed. "I don't know. Try left?" He nodded and took the turn. The road narrowed, the trees pressing closer on either side. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, the sound loud in the growing silence. After a few minutes, the road opened into a small clearing, and there it was, a cabin. Only, it wasn't our cabin. The building looked old. The wood was weathered and gray, the windows dark, and the roof sagged under the weight of moss and time. A single porch light flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. Rob slowed the car, his brow furrowed. "This doesn't look like the pictures," I said, my voice uneasy. "Maybe it's just an older photo," Rob suggested, though even he didn't sound convinced. We pulled into the driveway, the tires kicking up a small cloud of dust. I stayed in the car while Rob walked up to the porch. He knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the door creaked open just a crack, and an older woman appeared. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles, her gray hair pulled back into a messy bun. Her eyes darted between Rob and the car, suspicion written all over her expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sharp. "We're looking for a cabin," Rob explained. "We might be lost. Do you know where the Aspen Trail cabins are?" The woman's gaze lingered on Rob for a moment before she nodded slowly. "You're a bit off track," she said. "My husband knows these roads better than anyone. He'll be back soon. You can wait here if you like." There was something about her tone, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Rob turned to me, gesturing for me to join him. Reluctantly, I stepped out of the car, the cool evening air sending a shiver down my spine. The woman gestured to the porch swing, but she didn't invite us inside. I sat down, my eyes scanning the darkened windows of the house. Rob tried to make small talk, asking about the area, the roads, the cabins. The woman answered in short, clipped sentences, her eyes flicking toward the horizon as if waiting for something, or someone. The minutes stretched into an hour. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be there. "Maybe we should keep driving," I whispered to Rob. He frowned. "Let's just wait a bit longer. They might know the way." Before I could argue, the sound of a truck pulling into the driveway broke the silence. Headlights swept across the porch, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded denim jacket and a weathered hat. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but his presence was intimidating. "Evening?" he said gruffly, his eyes narrowing as he looked us over. Rob stood, explaining our situation again. The man listened silently, then motioned for Rob to follow him to the truck. I stayed on the porch, watching as Rob and the man talked. The woman came out of the house, leaning against the doorframe with a strange smile on her face. Then everything happened at once. Rob's voice rose in panic. "No, no, no!" he shouted, backing away from the man. Before I could react, the man raised a shotgun and fired. The sound was deafening. Rob collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. I froze, my mind screaming at me to move, to do something, but my body refused to obey. The woman laughed, a shrill, manic sound, and lunged at me with a hatchet. Instinct took over. I turned and ran, the sound of her footsteps close behind. The forest closed in around me, branches tearing at my clothes and skin as I sprinted through the darkness. The sounds of pursuit, shouts, gunshots, the crunch of leaves, faded as I stumbled onto a dirt road. Ahead, I saw the faint glow of a porch light. I collapsed on the doorstep of a small farmhouse, pounding on the door with what little strength I had left. The couple who lived there called the police. When the authorities arrived, I led them back to the cabin, or at least where I thought it had been. But when we arrived, there was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash. The bodies of Rob, the man, and the woman were never found. To this day, I don't know who they were or why they did what they did, but I know one thing. A wrong turn can lead to nightmares you'll never wake up from. What would you have done in this situation? Hit subscribe and ring the bell to never miss another chilling story from Nightmare Narratives.